right, boys and girls, we are back to Schooled by Gordon Corman, and we are going to tackle chapter 16 today, and we are very excited over here. The cat and the dog want to get involved in the storytelling. In fact, I'm going to move this paper to the ground to avoid further incident. Yesterday, I tried to record this, and Dash decided that he should bark really loudly in the middle. And so, despite the fact that I felt I had done a good job explaining the aha moment, I had an aha moment myself and realized that I could not keep that video. So, here we go. Aha moment. It is what we talked about yesterday, where a character suddenly realizes or figures something out, and you ask yourself, how might this change things? Readers constantly need to be checking in with themselves to make more meaning of the story, to read it closely. We've talked about contrast and contradiction. That's when a character does something opposite to what we would expect the average person to do, or opposite what they've been doing so far in the story. And we can ask the question, why is the character doing that? And then finally, the memory moment, when a character takes us back into their time in their life and reminds us of something that transpired. You want to ask, why is this memory important? All of these things give us understanding of perhaps the plot, the character's motivations, the theme, the purpose, the author's purpose. So we want to ask questions. We want to stop, notice and note, and see when we see these different signposts. So we're going to try that today with chapter 16 with Capricorn Anderson. I knew something was wrong the minute I got off the bus and walked to the Donnellys. The Saturn was in the driveway, which meant that Mrs. Donnelly was home early and the TV was off, even though TNT would be on in a few minutes. Sophie and her mom were in the kitchen. I heard Mrs. Donnelly's voice first. Oh, honey, don't feel bad. You know how he is. I hurried into the room. What happened? Is everything all right? An empty Dancy bottle missed my ear by inches. Get out of here! Sophie shrieked. Mind your own business! Sophie, her mother exclaimed in horror. You apologize to Cap. In answer, she leapt out of her chair and raced for the stairs. Mother, don't you dare tell the freakazoid anything about this. She pounded up to her bedroom and slammed the door. I looked at Miss Donnelly. What did I do? It was a silly question. What did I ever do? Nothing. And Sophie still treated me as if I had crawled in from the septic tank. Okay, I love the descriptive language in that sentence. I'm going to read it to you again. And Sophie still treated me as if I'd crawled in from the septic tank. If you don't know what a septic tank is, you don't find that funny. You might want to stop and jot that as vocabulary. A septic tank is where all the waste from your toilet goes. Okay, it is a wastewater holding area for those of us not hooked into public water and waste. So, can you imagine crawling in from a septic tank? Ew. All right, that said, we are noticing Sophie's acting the way she always does. Okay? Please forgive Sophie, Miss Donnelly begged. She had just had some bad news. I was worried. Did something happen to Mr. Donnelly? Okay, so to me this is a contrast and contradiction because Mrs. Donnelly does not act like any parent I know. If my child chose to speak to another person like that, I would be saying, excuse me, and I would be headed up to say, we will discuss this when you're feeling calmer, and there would be a consequence. But hey, every parent is different, and Ms. Donnelly is very unique. Nothing that hasn't happened before, she sighed. He took off without so much as a goodbye. But what about the driving test? I protested. A license might have been just a piece of paper, but to Sophie it meant everything. She shrugged. We'll just have to reschedule for when I can take her. My ex-husband is not a reliable person, but he doesn't see things through. My ex-husband is not a terrible person, but he doesn't see things through. He rolls into town, gets everybody's hopes up, and then he's gone until the next time when he does it all over again. I learned my lesson and got off the roller coaster. My daughter hasn't figured it out yet. I felt terrible for Sophie. She was really crushed. Mr. Donnelly left town so suddenly that she hadn't even gotten her bracelet back from the engraver. Who knew if she'd ever see it again? But of course, it was a lot more than losing a silver bangle that upset her. Life certainly gets complicated when you know more than one person. I could only imagine what it would be like when I knew 1100. Aha moment. How might this change things? I see that Cap is starting to relate to the fact that different connections with different people, you're going to get different responses and different behavior. He's realizing that life outside of Garland is more complicated. On Trigonometry and Tears, there was a character named Rushan who really bothered me. He didn't cheat on his girlfriend like Nick or spread computer viruses just for fun like Aurora, but his irresponsible behavior was almost impossible to bear. Sophie definitely didn't agree. What do you care? It's a TV show. Her mood had been in free fall since Mr. Donnelly's departure. But if he doesn't take the SAT to bring up his score, the University of Florida is going to withdraw his acceptance, I exclaimed. Sophie looked at me pityingly. So? He hasn't even started studying, and he overslept and missed the practice test. That's what they do on TNT, she explained. They take perfectly normal people and turn their lives into pond scum. That's why it's fun to watch. If everything was perfect, there'd be no story. But what's Rashawn going to do next year, I persisted. Probably find a part on a different show. He's an actor. Because Sophie had been watching TV her whole life, and not just a few weeks like me, it was easier for her to watch Rashawn throw his whole future away. For me, it was agony. Rain always said that when we judge others, we're really judging ourselves. That was the real reason Rashawn upset me. How could he think his SAT scores were going to go up by themselves? How could he ignore the fact that he was about to lose his spot in college? It was all too familiar. As 8th grade president, I was in charge of the Halloween dance, and I was giving it the Rashawn treatment. I was ignoring the whole thing, almost as if I thought it might go away. Aha moment. How might this change things? Let's see what he does. Then, on TNT, it all worked out for Rashawn. One of Aurora's viruses found its way into the admission department's computer at the University of Florida, wiping out half their records. All that were left indicated that Rashawn was accepted. He ignored his problem, and the problem just sort of melted away. With a growing sense of wonder, I realized that the same thing was happening with the dance. I was still doing nothing, yet somehow the arrangements were being made. Students would come up to me in the halls. They would sing along when I played guitar in the music room. They would join in my morning Tai Chi routine, and then they would volunteer to help. So many people were working on the party that I was beginning to think we were actually going to have one. No wonder TNT was such a popular show. It was practically an instruction manual for life. Garland Farm followed simple logic. You plant tomato seeds, you get tomato plants. No seeds, no tomatoes. Cause and effect. But a real school was so messy and random that solutions sometimes fell into place by sheer luck. It was almost like getting tomatoes without first planting seeds. All right, so again, I'm going to pause. If I had my reading journal next to me, I would probably write this as a quote, but a real school was so messy and random that solutions sometimes fell into place by sheer luck. And the reason that I would do that is because it's kind of an aha moment for us that we're seeing and thinking about. So what is your thinking about that? Have you ever had an experience like that where things just work out because of luck that you didn't think would? Or maybe you hoped something would go away and it actually got worse because you didn't deal with it. This would be a great moment to stop and show your thinking and experience connecting to your life or maybe to another book that you've read. Okay? And again, we can see that Cap is showing us, through his understanding of a situation, that things might change, that he might maybe choose to ignore stuff or hope that things work out. I thought I'd never get used to the outside world with its chaos and clutter, but with millions of puzzle pieces being tossed up into the air, it really did stand to reason that the occasional one would come down in the right place. That was why Rashawn would go to college and see Average would have its Halloween dance. Even Rain would have to admit that there was something kind of impressive about that. Anderson, come over here. I need a word with you. The words jolted me out of deep meditation. I looked up to see Mr. Kazaski glaring down at me. Why haven't you come to meet with me yet? I was floored. I did, the day I registered. Don't play dumb with me, mister. I'm hearing talk of DJs and pizza ovens on wheels. How are you going to pay for all that? I don't have any money. He was getting red in the face. Nobody expects you to pay for it. The school has money set aside for the dance, but if you don't present your budget, I can't release one penny. I don't have a budget, I explained honestly. I just have people who help me do things. Like what? Fix your cuckoo clock? He launched into a long speech about how he had volunteered to be on the program committee for some principals conference, so he didn't have time to nursemaid me through Finance 101, whatever that was. But it's all taken care of, I tried to tell him. The food, the music, the decorations, it all just worked out. I stopped myself before telling him about Rashawn. I had a feeling Mr. Kazaski was not a TNT fan. And who's writing the checks? He demanded. Checks? Rain had a checkbook, but I never saw her touch it. Sometimes we used money to get along, she used to tell me, but that doesn't mean we have to become its slave. To Rain, financial matters were distasteful but necessary private functions, like going to the bathroom. Mr. Kazaski said I would have to write checks. Not only that, but he would have to co-sign them, or they wouldn't count. After school, he drove me to the bank. I'd never been in one before. But the instant I stepped inside, I knew this was the place that represented everything Rain and I were rejecting by living at Garland. Money was all that was important here. People were depositing it, withdrawing it, borrowing it, and paying it back. They were counting it in broad daylight. I honestly felt like running away. But how could I? For one thing, there was a man in uniform guarding the door. I practically jumped out of my skin when I realized that he had a great big gun strapped to his hip. Mr. Kazaski noticed my reaction. Calm down, Anderson. He's a security man, not a bank robber. Every time I thought I was fitting into my temporary life, something would remind me just how much of an outsider I still was. I wanted less than nothing of what this place had to offer. But to people outside Garland, money was so desirable that the bank had to hire armed guards to keep criminals from stealing it. When I finally got back home, I was going to drop to my knees and kiss the ground. Mr. Kazaski and I met with an assistant manager, and when it was all over, I was holding a book of checks marked Claveridge Middle School, Student Activity Fund. You'll need these to pay for music and food, he explained, signing the first 12 checks on the spot. And I'm sure there will be other expenses that come up. They always do. I tried to tell him that I didn't know the DJ or the pizza company, that other students had made the arrangements. But he interrupted me with this long lecture about how this money belonged to everybody, not just me, and how I had to be responsible. And I would have been, if I had the slightest idea what he was talking about. So, there's a contrast and contradiction right there. He has no idea about money and bank accounts and how you have a certain amount. So he doesn't know how to be responsible. So that statement is kind of a foreshadowing of things to come. Why is the character doing that? Because it's, again, showing us how isolated Garland Farm was and what his life now represents. And it's helping us, I think the author wants us to be thinking about our lives and the value of money and what would it be like if you didn't have that. So Again, when we read, we want to think, and in our reading journal, we want to ponder. That means think about these different ideas. Let's see what happens next. All I wanted was for him to leave so I could get out of this awful place. I wouldn't even let him drive me to the Donnellys. I needed to walk there in the fresh air just to get the smell of banking out of my nostrils. A few blocks down the street, a sight met my eyes that stopped me in my tracks. There, in the display window of a small jewelry shop, leaned a silver bangle with multicolored stones. It was exactly the same as Sophie's birthday gift from her father, the one he'd taken for engraving and never brought back. I stepped into the store for a closer look. It was beautiful, but also kind of sad, because it reminded me of how upset Sophie had been lately. The idea came immediately. If I bought this bracelet, had it engraved, and sent it to Sophie, she'd never know that it hadn't come from her father. And it would make her happy. I didn't have any money, but I had something even better. Checks, which automatically counted as exactly as much money as you wrote it in that little box. It probably wasn't what Mr. Kazaski had in mind, but I remembered his exact words. Be responsible. Rain always said that nothing was more responsible than doing what was in your power to make another human being happy. Memory moment, he's gone back to Rain and her advice, and he's taking it. Do you think it's a good idea for him to use the student activity fund to buy Sophie a bracelet? That would be a Stop and Shop for sure. And why is this memory important? Again, we can see how cap has been raised and the society's been dropped into and the mismatch. I'll take it, I told the woman behind the counter. It's $175. She was wary. Do you accept checks? On that cheery note, next time we'll do chapter 17 with Mrs. Donnelly, and I look forward to seeing what you do with your own stories and your own reading journal, because we are all developing as readers and as thinkers. And so there you have it. Catch you another day.
Bye.